just give me your overall thoughts about the Heat essentially dominating the Celtics on the road in this game 7 to advance to the NBA Finals.
Well, I mean, I want to give my big kudos right now to Caleb Martin. He was one vote shy of getting the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, the Larry Bird Trophy. Um, I think he played his ass off. He played his way into a big contract coming up this offseason. I think he's going to be a coveted, sought out asset for multiple teams this offseason. So, again, kudos to Caleb. Incredible big time shot selection. He hit those big shots. He was very efficient from the field. He was also able to rebound the basketball at the guard position very well. He was able to defend effectively. Again, just being a disruptor, finding ways to kind of just throw people off their rhythm, get his hands in the passing lanes, and just be an overall kind of difficult assignment in terms of who he was guarding on the offensive side. But what he was able to do in terms of being that second scorer behind Jimmy Butler, that person that can go out there and get you a bucket. Yes, Gabe Vincent had some good games. Duncan Robinson had some decent performances. Bam Adebayo had some good performances earlier in the series. But when you talk about a level of consistency throughout this round, Caleb Martin was that player. So kudos to him. You know, obviously everybody knows the whole story. J. Cole got him a tryout with the Heat, and the rest is history. So Caleb Martin, definitely want to give you your respect and your kudos in terms of the game as a whole. I mean the thing that Miami focused on was defense. Found ways to close out on the 3-point line, so Boston was inefficient. Found ways to create turnovers as a whole. Jaylen Brown had 8 by himself. They were able to knock down some timely shots, even though they had struggled on the offensive side as well. Jimmy Butler had himself a big game. I believe he had 28, 6, and 7. So he had a reawakening of sorts because we all know Game 6's stats for Jimmy were absolutely horrendous outside of those late game free throws that Kyle had mentioned. So as a unit, Miami did what they needed to do. I mean, when you talk about the box score and what people were able to provide, we have 28 from Jimmy, 26 from Caleb, 12 from Bam, 10 from Gabe Vincent, 10 from Duncan Robinson. Like everybody was able to put up decent to good numbers. And when you talk about Jimmy Butler as a whole, the mentality, we're going to win this game. We're going to go into Boston. We've won games here in the past. We've won games here specifically in this series. We're not worried. Spoken into existence. They even, I didn't know this. Kyle apparently had read this earlier in the day. A report had come out before the game had even started that Miami's charter booked or scheduled a flight to Denver after this game, basically assuming they were going to win and head to Denver as Denver is the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. So the series will go through Denver for the finals. I find that to be a very bold statement for Miami as an organization to let that happen and say, you know what, this is what we're going to do. Obviously, you can change the flight, the itinerary. It's a private charter. It's just to publicly state that is crazy. Jimmy Butler to come out and say we're going to win Game 7 after a failed prediction at winning Game 6, also crazy. But they backed it up and they did what they needed to do. I mean, realistically, the Miami Heat are on a historic run and they've dealt with their fair share of adversity, losing Oladipo, Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler having a couple bad games in terms of like coming back down from his playoff Jimmy run. You almost choking away a 3-0 lead. There was a lot of negative narratives coming out of Miami throughout this series and throughout the playoffs, to be honest. But as a whole, what a series. Don't ask me why I said what 6 times. I was trying to figure out another word, but it didn't come out. Miami just came out and they wanted it more. Miami's shot selection was better. Their defensive presence was better. Their overall attitude and body language was better. And they just looked out coached as well. Boston came out flat in that second half, especially in that fourth quarter. They weren't really able to tame that beast that is the Miami Heat. And Miami goes to their second finals appearance in the last 4 years, man. So kudos to the Heat. Super happy for them. Isabel wants to get me a Jimmy Butler jersey for my birthday. So shout out to my girlfriend. That would be pretty cool. But overall, man, what a series, what an overall performance by both teams. Shout out to Boston. You know, obviously they made this entertaining. It was not a sweep, but for you to not show up on your home floor, Game 7, unfortunately Jason gets hurt. Jaylen has 8 turnovers. Marcus Smart's a no-show. A list of endless narratives that you can kind of go down, but the bottom line is the Boston Celtics fall short yet again.
I mean, for me, the main focus has to be geared towards Miami, just because, when you're up 3-0 in the series and you have a chance to potentially sweep one of the best teams in the NBA, and not only do you squander that, you lose 3 straight games, and now you have a game 7, not on your home court, but back in Boston, with Boston having all the momentum in the world. The fact that Miami was not only able to rise to the challenge, but really exceed the challenge in winning game 7 to advance to the NBA Finals, you really have to give a lot of kudos to not only the coaching staff, but the players as a whole. They understood the severity of this game, and the lights were not too bright for them. Granted, there were times where they missed some shots, they had some turnovers, but by and large, I think what you said was correct. I think they put a lot of emphasis on putting a huge amount of defensive pressure on Boston, and Boston really couldn't handle it. And then on top of that, you get some really good performances from both Jimmy Butler and Caleb Martin, and that essentially got you this win. So, like Kev said, I give the Heat all the kudos in the world. Granted, I didn't pick them to win this series, but really, this is an accomplishment that, to be quite honest with you guys, I haven't really seen something like this within my lifetime that I can really remember. I know that we've talked about the Knicks were the last 8 seed to advance to the NBA Finals, but that was almost 25 years ago, and I was 4 years old. It's not something that I really remember quite vividly, but nonetheless, when you actually get to experience an 8 seed like this advance to the NBA Finals, you really have to give a lot of kudos and respect to this team. And honestly, I think a lot of praise should be heaped towards Eric Spoelstra, who, in my eyes, is probably now, without a doubt, the best coach in the NBA, because I don't think there's too many coaches that can lead a unit like this to an NBA Finals appearance with this team being the 8 seed. So I just wanted to give Eric Spoelstra a lot of credit, because this was really quite a performance from him, just from a coaching perspective. As for the game itself, for me, this was just a defensive minded game, I think, from a Miami perspective. Miami really gave Boston fits in that first half. And pretty much when I look back at this game, Boston was chasing the game the entire way through. They only scored, I believe, 15 points in that first quarter. And that was despite the fact that Boston got off to a very hot start within like the first couple of minutes of the first quarter. And then Miami went on like a 10-2 run and closed out that first quarter very effectively. And Boston definitely made some runs in that second quarter, but Miami was able to respond effectively with some timely jump shots, some good 3-point shots from either Jimmy Butler or Caleb Martin. And it just seemed as if that Boston was always down double digits. Granted, going into that third quarter, I think they got it to around 7 points. And had a couple of different plays gone in Boston's favor, maybe they could have trimmed that deficit to maybe a 1 possession game, maybe get it to 3 points or less. But to me, it was Jimmy Butler and Caleb Martin, especially Caleb Martin. I thought Caleb was great behind the 3-point line, and he's been a consistent player for Miami behind the 3-point line the entire series. And he stepped up probably in the biggest game of his professional career and really gave Miami a lot to work with, especially with those jump shots behind the 3-point line. And when it comes to Miami, I just think from an overall perspective, even though that they didn't have what I would consider the best game that I've seen from them in this series, it was, I think, probably their best defensive performance that I've seen. And when you can hold a team like Boston to under 90 points, really, you have to give this team a lot of credit, because even though that Boston technically scored over 80 points, Miami and Boston basically pulled out all their starters, and Boston was still at 79 points. So the fact that Miami basically, I'm not saying shut out Boston, but really limited them offensively in this game, you really have to give a lot of credit to the players bringing that playoff intensity, especially defensively, and the coaches. I imagine pregame and probably the game plan going in was very simple. We're gonna make timely shots when we get open looks, and then we're gonna play just hellacious defense. And I think that really worked out in their favor. So overall, when it comes to Miami, Miami was great in this game. I think more than likely what I'll take away from this game is just their defensive effort was outstanding, especially with forcing the amount of turnovers that they did and holding Boston to one of their weakest performances behind the 3 point line. Kev, if I remember correctly, I think Boston only hit 9 threes in this game. And I think when they pulled all their starters out, they'd only hit 8. I think one of their threes came in garbage time. So the fact that Miami was able to effectively hold Boston to really only 8 made threes, I don't know what else you could ask more from them. Granted, neither team really made a huge effort to going into the free throw line because I think Miami only had about 5 or 6 free throw attempts. And Boston, I think, had maybe a dozen and maybe just a little bit more than a dozen. So, obviously it's a game seven. The pressure of game sevens are always intense. But to me, Miami was able to rise to the occasion, make the timely shots that they needed to make, and they got some great stops on the other end. And they made Boston chase the game. Boston was never really ahead in this game outside of maybe the first couple minutes in the first quarter. And once Miami was able to extend their lead, especially late in the third quarter, going into that fourth quarter, the fourth quarter is when they blew this thing wide open. Boston was out of sorts, and they just could not knock down shots consistently. And that's why the Miami Heat are advancing to the finals. And Boston's going home. So once again, congratulations to the Heat for advancing to the NBA Finals. It's going to be very interesting to see what this matchup is going to present when we see the Denver Nuggets and the Miami Heat go at it later this week. I believe on Thursday. That's when game 1 takes place. But it'll be very interesting to see how that dynamic plays out because it's going to be very interesting to see a number 1 seeded Nuggets team go up against a number 8 seeded Miami Heat team. But we shall see how that plays out on Thursday. But once again, congratulations to the Heat for advancing to the finals. It's quite a feat to do as the 8 seed.